The following Appalachian Mountains horror story is real, disturbing, and should be used as a warning. The names and locations have been altered to protect the individuals involved. Viewer discretion is advised. Deep in the Smokies, a seasoned hiker stumbled across something so deeply disturbing that he packed up camp and never went back. Nobody followed him home. Nobody left a mark on his body. But somebody, or something, had been keeping track of him for a very long time. He came to the woods to be alone. That used to mean something good. Clay Merritt was 39 years old, broad-shouldered, and going just slightly soft around the middle in the way that happens to men who used to play college lacrosse and now spend 10 hours a day in back-to-back Zoom calls. He had strong opinions about trekking pole grip ratios. He had a laminated gear checklist he updated every spring. He had a project management certification framed on the wall of a home office that smelled like coffee and mild regret. He also had a wife he genuinely loved, 2 kids who needed things from him at a volume and frequency that he found both deeply meaningful and completely exhausting, and a Dollywood cabin booked for the week because his youngest had watched a YouTube video about roller coasters approximately 400 times, and it had become a whole thing. The family was taken care of. His wife had a spa day Tuesday. The kids had a pool and a pile of new pool toys and absolutely zero interest in where their father was going. Nobody needed Clay Merritt until Thursday. He had hiked this stretch of the Appalachian Trail out of Newfound Gap more times than he could honestly count. North toward Charlie's Bunyan, up through the high-altitude spruce fir corridor, where the air thinned just enough to remind you that you were somewhere real. On a clear summer morning up there, the whole spine of the Smokies laid itself out beneath you like something that didn't belong to the 21st century. No cell towers, no highway noise, just ridge after ridge going blue-gray into the distance, older than almost anything else on the continent. He knew every route crossing on this trail, every reliable water source, the particular way the path bent left just past the 2nd mile marker before the long climb. He had walked it in the dark once, a miscalculation on a November trip 3 years ago. Headlamp dead, navigating by feel and memory. And he had been fine. He knew this place the way you know a room in your own house. That was the whole point. He set up camp the first evening in his usual spot. If you've never hiked this section, picture it like this. About a 1/4 mile east of the main trail, there's a flat clearing maybe 30 feet across, sheltered on the north side by a dense wall of Fraser fir. There's one big yellow birch at the clearing's edge, thick trunk, low branch at about 8 feet, that Clay had been hanging his bear bag from for the better part of a decade. The ground is soft but not boggy. The ridge is visible to the west, and in the last hour of light it goes purple, then deep red, then a kind of dark blue that makes you feel very small in a way that Clay specifically needed to feel about once a year. He ate. He read. He watched the ridge go through its colors. The mountains settled around him the way it always did. The ambient noise dropping gradually as the light went, insects taking over from birds, the temperature sliding down fast the way it does at elevation even in July. His shoulders dropped about 2 inches. His jaw unclenched. The particular tightness behind his eyes that had been there since approximately March loosened just slightly. He felt, for the first time in months, completely fine. He was getting ready to zip the tent when his headlamp caught it. A boot print. Just outside the tent door, maybe 8 inches from the rainfly. He almost missed it. The mud was dark and the print was pressed deep, which made it hard to read in artificial light. He crouched down and angled the beam across it. Fresh. The edges were still sharp and clean. No water seeping in yet. It was facing toward the tent, not passing through camp, not angled away toward the tree line, facing directly, deliberately toward the tent door, the way you'd stand if you were looking at something. Clay held his own boot next to it. Same size, same aggressive lug tread, the Salomon GTX, the trail runner he'd been wearing for 3 seasons. He stayed crouched for a moment, turning it over. Then he stood up, told himself he'd made it earlier and forgotten, and went to bed. He came in from the north. The print was on the south side of the tent. He hadn't been on the south side of the tent. He slept fine. That was the thing about Clay Merritt. He was very good at not looking directly at things. Morning came the way mornings always came up here, fast and cold and indifferent, the kind of cold that gets into your sleeping bag from the bottom and works its way up until ignoring it isn't an option anymore. Clay was packed and moving by 6:15. The boot print was still there. He stepped over it on his way to the bear bag tree, unclipped his food sack, and did not look back at it. This was not a conscious decision. It was the same mental mechanism that lets a person drive to work and arrive with no memory of the route. The brain quietly deciding that certain inputs don't require processing. The print was the same size as his boot, same tread. He had made it at some point and forgotten. Case closed, door shut, moving on. The trail gave him exactly what he came for. The first mile was the climb, long and grinding, the kind that punishes you for every hour you spent sitting in an office chair in the last 12 months, which for Clay was a significant number of hours. His lungs burned. His calves burned. He leaned into the poles and pushed, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark his body stopped complaining and just got to work, the way bodies do when you give them no other option. By mile 3, he was in the corridor, the high spruce fir zone where the trees grow close and dense and the light comes through in long diagonal shafts that make the whole place feel like the inside of a cathedral that nobody built on purpose. The air was different up here, thinner, cleaner, carrying just a trace of something almost sweet that Clay had never been able to identify and had stopped trying to. He passed 2 other hikers going south, exchanged nods, and felt the specific satisfaction of a man who is exactly where he chose to be. He pushed north until early afternoon, ate lunch on a rock outcropping with a view that would have made a lesser man take 47 photos for Instagram, and then turned back south. Good day, strong legs, clear head. He was maybe 200 yards from the clearing when he saw the box. It was sitting at the edge of the tree line, right where the trail spur broke off toward his campsite. Brown cardboard, sealed with packing tape. The ordinary kind. The kind that showed up on your porch when you ordered something from Amazon. Sitting upright, centered, placed with a kind of deliberate neatness that was somehow worse than if it had just been dropped. Clay stopped walking. He stood there for a moment, poles in hand, and did the reasonable thing. He looked around, checked the trail in both directions, scanned the tree line. Nobody. The woods were quiet in the specific way woods get quiet in the late afternoon, that held-breath stillness before the insects start up again. His first thought was, someone's messing with me. His second thought, the one he pushed down before it fully formed, was, how did they know this exact campsite? He picked up the box. No label, no postage, no shipping information of any kind. Just a plain brown box about the size of a shoebox, sealed carefully, with no markings except a faint crease along one corner where it had been carried. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded into a neat square. Origami, almost. The creases were precise, intentional. He unfolded it carefully, not entirely sure why he was being careful. The handwriting was neat. Blue ink. Unhurried, like whoever wrote it had all the time in the world. Do you like me? Yes/no. Clay stared at it for a long time. Long enough that the light shifted noticeably and the temperature dropped another 2 degrees. Then he laughed. A short, single note. Not a real laugh, the kind that escapes before you can stop it, a pressure valve releasing. He refolded the paper, put it back in the box, sealed the flaps down, and walked it 20 feet to the base of a tree at the clearing's edge. Set it down with its back against the bark, like he was returning a library book. College kids, trail pranksters. Some kind of weird geocache experiment that got out of hand. The AT drew its share of oddballs, and he had met enough of them over the years to know that strange did not automatically mean dangerous. Strange usually just meant bored. He cooked dinner, freeze-dried chili, which tasted significantly better than it had any right to. He read for an hour. His heart rate was elevated. He noticed it distantly, attributed it to the day's mileage and the elevation, and he fell asleep before 9. He didn't circle yes or no, he didn't engage. Whatever this was, he'd given it nothing to work with. Therefore, he expected it to end there. The box was outside his tent in the morning. He hadn't moved it. The origami was inside, refolded. Night 2. Clay hiked harder the second day. He told himself it was because the weather was good. He told himself it was because his legs felt strong and he wanted to push his mileage before the trip was over. He did not tell himself it was because he wanted to delay returning to camp for as long as possible, but that was the reason. And somewhere behind his sternum, he knew it. He went further north than he'd planned, turned back later than he should have. The light was already going amber and low when he finally reversed direction, and he moved fast on the return. Poles working, not thinking about the trail, not thinking about anything in particular. Just moving. The box was there. Same spot, same placement, same deliberate neatness, like someone had measured the distance from the tent and set it down with both hands. His jaw tightened. He picked it up, opened it, unfolded the note. Different handwriting this time. Or the same handwriting written faster, the letters slightly less careful, slightly more pressured, like whoever was writing it had moved past pleasantries and gotten to the point. If you like me, yes or no. If yes, yell yes. Clay read it 3 times. The light was going the way light goes up here in the Smokies, not gradually, not a slow fade, but a sudden categorical shift from day to not day. The tree line went from green to black in what felt like 30 seconds. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in the time it took him to read the note a 4th time. Every reasonable instinct said, put it down. Every reasonable instinct said, eat dinner, get some sleep, pack out first thing tomorrow morning, tell nobody about this because there was nothing to tell. He cupped his hands around his mouth, yelled at once into the dark, yes. His voice came back off the ridge wrong, flat, compressed, like the sound had been absorbed and then handed back smaller than it left. No echo exactly, just a diminished return, like the trees had taken something out of it. Nothing moved. Nothing answered. The woods were exactly as dark and exactly as quiet as they had been before he opened his mouth. He ate. He slept. Just before he closed his eyes, he checked the south side of the tent. Fresh boot print, same size, same tread, facing in. He had said yes, and whatever was listening hadn't moved toward him. It had just gotten closer. Clay woke up before his alarm. This was not unusual for him. He was a light sleeper at home and a lighter one in the field, the kind of camper who surfaced at every owl call and every branch drop and spent the first 30 seconds of consciousness running a quiet diagnostic. Location, temperature, threat level. It was a habit so ingrained he didn't notice it anymore. Just the way his brain booted up. This morning the diagnostic came back wrong. He couldn't say why exactly. The tent was fine. The light coming through the rainfly was the right color for early morning, that thin gray-green that meant maybe an hour before sunrise. Temperature was normal. No sounds that shouldn't be there, just a feeling. The particular feeling of a room that was occupied a moment ago. He lay still for a few seconds, listening. Then he unzipped the tent and looked out. The box was sitting in the middle of the clearing, not at the tree line this time, not at the edge of camp. In the middle of the clearing, maybe 15 feet from the tent door, placed in the exact center the way you'd place something you wanted to be found. The morning mist was sitting low around it, barely ankle height, and the box rose out of it clean and deliberate and wrong. Clay sat in the tent doorway for a moment with his camp mug in his hand, the coffee not yet made, just holding the empty mug the way you hold something when your hands need to be doing something. Then he got up, started the stove, made the coffee, and picked up the box. He handled it with the same two-handed care he'd been using since the first one. He wasn't sure when that had started, the carefulness, but it was there now, automatic, like whatever was inside deserved to be handled deliberately. He set down the mug, worked the tape up with his thumbnail, opened the flaps. One piece of paper. No origami this time, just folded once in half. The handwriting was smaller, less careful. The letters were still legible, but the spacing was tighter, like the writer had been working faster or with less room, or under some kind of pressure that hadn't been there before. Find the tree. Go straight. You'll see me. Clay read it twice, set it down on top of the box. Drank his coffee. Here is the thing about Clay Merritt that you need to understand. He was not a reckless man. He did not take unnecessary risks. He wore a helmet when he mountain biked. He kept a first aid kit in his car. He had a will. He was the person in a group who said, "Let's think about this for a second," when everyone else was already moving. But he was also a man who finished things, who found it genuinely difficult to leave a question unanswered, a task incomplete, a door half open. It was the same quality that made him good at his job and occasionally impossible to live with. His wife called it his resolution problem. She said it with affection mostly. He went straight. 30 yards out from camp, the first arrow appeared, carved into the bark of a spruce at eye level, roughly cut, deep. Not casual work. Whoever made it had pressed hard and taken their time. The cuts were clean at the edges, the kind you get from a sharp blade worked deliberately, not hacked. He followed it. A second arrow 20 feet further, a third beyond that, then a left turn marked by a branch bent in a direction branches don't bend naturally, lashed in place with a strip of orange surveyor's cloth so faded it had gone nearly pink. It could have been there for years. It could have been there for decades. Clay touched it once with 2 fingers. The cloth was stiff, brittle at the edges. He kept walking. The canopy closed in gradually as he moved away from the clearing, the trees tightening, the undergrowth thickening, the light going from thin gray-green to something dimmer and more diffuse. He pushed through a stand of rhododendron that grabbed at his pack straps and came out the other side into a section of old growth he didn't recognize. This was the part that started a low hum of wrongness in the back of his mind. He knew this ridge. He had walked every accessible section of this drainage at one point or another over 15 years of hiking. He had the topographic maps on his phone, and he had studied them the way some men study game film, learning the terrain before he walked it. There was no section of old growth here. He would have known about it. The shadows were sitting wrong. He noticed it gradually and then all at once. The light filtering through the canopy was coming from the wrong angles, the shadows falling in directions that didn't match the sun's position above the eastern ridge. It was subtle, the kind of thing your brain flags as a texture error before your conscious mind catches up. Like a photograph where someone got the lighting wrong. Dizziness hit him, brief and sharp, like the ground had adjusted an inch without moving. He stopped, put one hand on a nearby trunk, breathed through his nose, slow and deliberate, the way he'd been taught in a wilderness first aid course he'd taken years ago. Metallic taste at the back of his throat, palms wet inside his gloves. He stood there until it passed. Then he kept walking because stopping wasn't an answer, and turning back felt worse somehow. Felt like losing something he hadn't agreed to wager. The clearing opened up without warning. He nearly walked into it. One more step through the undergrowth, and suddenly there was open space, maybe 40 feet across, roughly circular, the canopy pulling back overhead to let in a column of gray morning light. The ground was clear. No undergrowth, no fallen branches, no accumulated leaf litter. Just bare soil, dark and slightly damp, undisturbed. And in the center, a tree, mid-sized, maybe 30 feet tall. The trunk was about 2 feet across at the base, the bark a dark gray-brown, the branches spreading wide and even in a way that suggested significant age. It looked old the way certain trees look old, settled, permanent, inevitable, like it had been there long before the forest around it, and would be there long after. Clay walked the perimeter of the clearing slowly, eyes on the tree. No moss, no lichen, no insect trails carved into the bark, no frost cracks, no storm damage, no evidence of any of the 1,000 small violences a tree accumulates over decades of surviving in the southern Appalachians. The bark was smooth, almost uniformly smooth, the way bark looks on a young tree, a tree that hasn't weathered anything yet. It looked old. It had not been here long. Clay stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it for a long time. His coffee was back at camp, getting cold. Somewhere behind him, a woodpecker was working at something steadily, rhythmically, and the sound seemed very far away. He knew this trail. He knew this ridge. He had the maps. This clearing did not exist. The tree stood in the center of it, like it had always been there. Like he was the new thing in this place. Not it. The bottles were arranged in a circle around the base of the tree. Clay saw them as he stepped into the clearing. Old glass Coca-Cola bottles, the brown kind, the heavy-walled kind that his grandfather had kept in a wooden crate in the garage of a house in Maryville that smelled like motor oil and cedar shavings. The kind that stopped being made sometime in the 70s. Each one was standing upright, evenly spaced, pressed into the bare soil just far enough to hold steady. Not thrown there, not dropped. Placed, the way you'd set a table for company. He counted them without deciding to. 11. He stood at the edge of the circle and looked at them for a long moment. The morning light was still gray and diffuse, filtered through the open column of canopy above, and it caught the glass at a low angle, so that each bottle threw a small dark shadow across the roots. The shadows all pointed inward, toward the trunk. Clay crouched down and picked up the nearest bottle. Through the glass he could see a rolled piece of paper inside, held in a loose curl by the neck of the bottle. He could see writing on it, dense lines of it, careful and small. He worked the paper out slowly, the glass smooth and cold against his palm, and unrolled it against his knee. No name, no greeting, no story, just a date. June 1962. He looked at it for a second. Then he set that bottle down and picked up the next one. March 1971. The next. August 1979. He moved through all 11 before he made a conscious decision to do so. His hands just kept moving, bottle to bottle, working the papers free, unrolling them against his knee, reading the single date on each one, and setting them in a line along the roots. His brain was doing something quiet and methodical in the background, the same way it processed a project timeline or a budget spreadsheet, sorting and ordering without being asked. When he finished, he had 11 dates in a line: June 1962, March 1971, August 1979, November 1983, April 1988, July 1994, February 1999, October 2004, May 2009, January 2016, August 2023. 61 years, 11 entries, roughly every 5 to 7 years, with no discernible pattern to the spacing. Someone, or something, had been coming to this tree since before Clay Merritt was born, since before his parents were married, since Kennedy was in the White House, and the Smokies were still being mapped in sections. He straightened up slowly. His knees ached from crouching. He hadn't noticed until now. He looked at the bark again. It landed fully this time, not as a background texture error, not as something his brain was quietly flagging, but as a direct, unavoidable fact. No moss, no lichen, no frost cracks or storm splits or the long diagonal scars that lightning leaves on old growth. No insect trails, no woodpecker damage, no signs of the beetles and borers that worked through every tree on this ridge. The bark was smooth and uniform from the roots to the lowest branches, the deep gray-brown of old wood, but with none of the surface history that old wood accumulated. A tree this size in this location should have 100 years of damage written into its bark. It had none. It looked old. It had not been weathered. It had not survived anything, because surviving left marks, and this tree had no marks, and that meant either it hadn't been here long enough to accumulate them, or something was maintaining it in a state of deliberate preservation that Clay did not have a framework for, and did not want one, like it had arrived here. Recently, he stood very still in the clearing, and his brain, which was good at processing information and very good at finishing things, handed him a thought he didn't ask for. There was no summer 2024 bottle. He looked at the circle of 11, the spacing in the soil where each bottle stood, pressed in just far enough, the even gaps between them. He walked the circle slowly, counting the gaps, and when he got back to where he started, he stopped. There was a gap between August 2023 and June 1962, where the circle closed, a space in the soil exactly the right width for one more bottle, pressed in just far enough, sitting upright. Empty. The thought arrived quietly, the way the worst thoughts always arrive, not as a shout, but as a low, certain voice from somewhere behind your sternum. There will be one. There just isn't one yet. Clay stood in that clearing for another 30 seconds. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear the woodpecker, very far away, still working steadily at something. He could hear the specific silence of a forest that was not making the sounds it should be making. No insects, no distant bird calls, nothing moving in the canopy above. Just his breathing and the woodpecker and the silence where everything else should have been. He took nothing. He touched nothing else. He did not take a photograph, which was strange because he had his phone, and the impulse to document things was deeply ingrained in him, and he didn't examine why the impulse wasn't there. He turned around and walked back the way he came. He followed his own boot prints through the wrong-angled shadows, back through the rhododendron, back past the faded orange cloth and the carved arrows, back through the old growth that shouldn't exist, back toward the thin gray-green light of the main tree line. He was halfway back to camp when he reached into his jacket pocket for his compass. His father's compass. Brass casing, white face, the needle balanced on a jeweled pivot that his father had told him would last a lifetime if you never dropped it. 15 years in that left pocket. He had never once needed it on this trail because he always knew exactly where he was. He held it flat on his palm. The needle was spinning, freely, continuously, like it had forgotten what it was for. Like north had stopped being a thing that existed in this particular piece of forest, and the needle was searching for it the way you search for a word that's suddenly gone from your memory. Not finding it, just moving, turning, unable to stop. Clay watched it spin for a moment. Then he put it back in his pocket and kept walking. 11 bottles, 61 years, 11 people, 11 somethings had found that tree, had stood in that clearing, had left a date and nothing else. And whatever had been maintaining it all this time, adding to it, placing boxes outside a stranger's tent, learning his campsite, learning his boot size, asking him questions in neat blue handwriting. It knew summer 2024 wasn't finished. It was just the most recent entry on a list that wasn't done yet. Clay packed up camp in 11 minutes. He knew this because he checked his watch when he started and checked it again when he finished. The same way he timed things at work. 11 minutes. He had packed a 3-day backcountry camp before, leisurely, with a second cup of coffee and no particular hurry. He did not have a second cup of coffee. He did not look at the south side of the tent. The trail back to Newfound Gap was 4.2 miles, and he covered it in just under 90 minutes, faster than he'd moved on either of the previous 2 days. He didn't push himself consciously. His legs just moved at the pace they moved, poles hitting the ground in a rhythm that felt less like hiking and more like something that needed to be finished. The spruce corridor that had felt like a cathedral 2 days ago felt narrow now. Close. He kept his eyes on the trail 12 feet ahead and didn't look into the trees. He reached the trailhead at 11:47. He sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. The parking lot was half full. A Tuesday in July. A family unloading gear from a minivan nearby. A kid complaining about her boots. A father explaining patiently that the boots were fine and they needed to get moving. Clay watched them for a second. Then he started the car and drove down the mountain. He called his wife and told her he was coming back early. Said his legs were good, figured he'd get back and take the kids to the water park tomorrow. She said they'd lose their minds. He said, yeah. She asked how the hiking was, and he said, good. Great, actually. Weather was perfect. He wasn't lying exactly. The hiking had been great. He got in the pool with the kids that afternoon and stayed in for 4 hours. Marco Polo, chicken fights, his youngest demanding to be thrown higher and higher until his shoulders gave out. He let her dunk him 3 times. His wife watched from a lounge chair with a book she wasn't really reading, and at some point he caught her watching him with a small private smile. Dinner was loud. He ate 2 plates. Everything was normal. He slept fine. He slept fine the next night, too. The drive home Thursday was unremarkable. Back in Knoxville, back in the routine, school pickups, conference calls, the particular chaos of a house with 2 kids in summer. Life picked back up the way life does, immediately and without ceremony. Everything was fine for about 3 days. Sunday morning, early, before the kids were up. He was reaching for his coffee mug when it slipped and hit the tile floor. Didn't break, just bounced, spun, came to rest against the baseboard. He looked at it. He stood there for a moment, and then instead of picking it up, he pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. He sat there for 20 minutes. Here is what he was actually thinking about, if you want to know. Not a monster, not a tree that was watching him, or waiting for him, or adding his name to some supernatural ledger. He was thinking about the dates. 61 years, 11 entries. Roughly every 5 to 7 years, same location, same method, a bottle, a rolled piece of paper, a single date. Which meant 11 different people had found that clearing. 11 different people had stood at the base of that tree and left something behind. And the only way that made sense was if someone was sending them there, the same way someone had sent him there. The boxes, the notes, the arrows carved into bark. Someone had been running this thing for 61 years, which meant, and this was the part his brain kept snagging on, the part that had nothing to do with the supernatural and everything to do with plain arithmetic. Whoever started it in 1962 was either very old now, or they had passed it on. Like a relay. Like something with continuity and intention and participants who knew what they were doing and why. And they had found him specifically. Not a random hiker. Him. His campsite. His boot size. His particular spot on the ridge that he'd been returning to for 15 years. And had never mentioned to anyone because it had never come up, because it was just a flat clearing near a birch tree that he liked. How long had they been watching? Before they left the first box. That was the question he couldn't put down. Not what is the tree, not what does it want. Just, how long had someone been watching a completely ordinary project manager from Knoxville hike the same stretch of trail on the same schedule? And what exactly had they decided about him when they chose to make him the 12th? Because that was the other thing. The gap in the circle, the empty space in the soil between August 2023 and June 1962. He hadn't left a bottle. He hadn't left a date. He had walked away. Which meant either the sequence was broken or someone was going to try again. His wife found him at the table and asked if he was okay. He said, "Yes, just tired here. I'll get the coffee." He got the coffee and made her a cup, and the kids came downstairs and the morning started up around him the way mornings did. He went about his day. He didn't report it. He'd thought about that, turned it over practically. Report what exactly? A cardboard box? A piece of paper with 2 words on it? A clearing that wasn't on any map? The ranger would look at him the way people looked at men who reported things they couldn't substantiate, and he would feel like an idiot and nothing would come of it. He didn't go back. That part was simple, required no deliberation. He had other trails. But sometimes, usually late at night, he'd find himself thinking about the person who left the August 2023 date. 5 months before his trip. Whoever they were, they had stood in that same clearing, looked at the same smooth bark, counted the same bottles, had gone home the same way Clay had gone home, quietly, without explaining it fully, carrying the arithmetic of it. He wondered if they sat at their kitchen table too. He wondered if they ever figured out what they'd actually been chosen for. What the sequence was building toward, whether walking away counted as an answer or just a delay. He didn't have a framework for it that satisfied him. That was the honest truth. Clay Merritt was a man who finished things, who needed resolution, who found open loops genuinely difficult to leave open. And this one wasn't closing. 61 years, 11 entries, 1 empty space in the soil. Not a ghost story, just a thing that happened that he could not explain, being carried by a man who was not built for carrying things he couldn't explain, in a kitchen in Knoxville on a Sunday morning with coffee going and his kids still asleep upstairs. He came to the woods to be alone. He understood now that alone was never really what it was. Some places on this earth aren't haunted by what happened there. They're haunted by what's still being decided. Clay didn't find a monster. He found 61 years of careful, patient record-keeping in a clearing that shouldn't exist, maintained by people he never saw for a purpose he never learned. He found his own boot print on the wrong side of his tent. He found evidence that something, organized, deliberate, ongoing, had decided he was next in a sequence that started before he was born. He walked away before he found out what the sequence was for. Whether that was the smart move or not, he genuinely couldn't tell you. He hasn't been back.